Hey everyone, welcome to the Happy Flosser podcast. My name is Billy Lunt. I am your host, and I'm here to talk to you about all things dental hygiene to support you on your journey through the dental hygiene program. It is really great to be with you today. And as we start deep into the beginning of our fall semester here, as I record this episode and plan to release it next week, I'm already noticing some stress in the students that I'm working with. And I have to tell you guys, I need to just remind you that you have what it takes. You know what you're doing. You can do all of this. You were able to get into dental hygiene school. So I told you I'm here to get you through dental hygiene school. And a lot of my students are starting week 3, and a lot of the students that I work with are kind of knee deep into the semester. And I'm starting to hear a lot of people have some self-doubt and some challenges in their belief system about what they're capable of. I just want to challenge you, if you're having those types of conversations with yourself, to just do some self-reflection of all the hard work that it took to get into dental hygiene school. And this is a journey. This is a transition from, being who you were to becoming who you want to be. So the starting point of that is to be the student that you need to be in order to become the hygienist that you want to be. Be that student, do all the things to have the end goal become your reality. So I want to touch on some of the basics that students are having trouble with. And so for those of you that are well into the program, this might seem a little like trivial or basic or kind of the, what do you mean people don't know that? But I don't disregard the foundational stuff. It's all important things. As you're working through kind of learning all of the basics, it's a good reminder for those of you that haven't taken your boards. I have lots of different episodes that cover all the different touch points of this topic. Dental terminology is episode number 11. I recorded that way back when I didn't know how to even record a podcast, and I was just kind of figuring it out as I went. And I leave those episodes out there, not for judgment, but to show you as a student that we all are growing. We're all doing that. So let's get started in kind of a different take on what I covered in dental terminology, episode 11. And that is, what is dental terminology? It's a completely different language, right? It's a language in dentistry that we use in order to communicate with one another. And it may feel like learning a foreign language when you're first learning dental terminology. But the basics of language are the same. Even in dental terminology, you have a prefix, a root word, and a suffix. And so if you read a dental terminology word and you don't know what it means, try to find the root word, that foundational meaning of the word. If you can figure out what the root word is, sometimes you can figure out what the prefix and suffix are, so that even if you don't necessarily know the word or you haven't seen it all in that configuration before, you have a better chance of figuring out what it means. The prefix is usually like a condition or a size, a location, or a quantity. And then the suffix is usually describing the amount, a condition, a procedure, or a state of being. For example, periodontitis. Perio would be the prefix, and that's around. Dont is teeth, and that would be the root word. And suffix is itis, and that would be inflammation. So understanding the general rules of how dental terms come together will go a long way in helping you kind of see a word and not freeze and not freak out and say, I don't know what that means. Then you can't answer the question, right? Oftentimes we're just so stressed out when we are taking a quiz or a test or some kind of assessment and we see a word that we don't know. I promise you, if you can take that word and try to break it down and find the root and then figure out the prefix and suffix, it kind of just breaks it up into smaller chunks, and it will give you your best chance at trying to understand the meaning, and that will help you develop an understanding. So when all those little parts of the word come together, it creates meaning around it. Just like, so periodontitis is inflammation of the tissue around the teeth. Periodontology, ology is the study, right? Periodontology is the study of the tissue around the teeth. And you'll take periodontology when you are in dental hygiene school. That's how just changing the suffix or changing the prefix that surround that root word will completely change the meaning of it. And that's simply how language works. Use everything that you've learned around language to help you develop a good understanding around dental terms. There are some general rules of dental terminology, and I covered that in episode 11. If you want to go ahead and listen to that episode, and it's really like how some of the endings are changed when things are when they're plural, and it's really important for you to know that, because that definitely helps you speak the language correctly. If you've ever tried to learn a different foreign language, one of the things we have a hard time with when we're learning another language is the tenses, right? So if a word ends in a certain letter, we change it, or maybe we drop a letter. So those are the rules that you just have to learn for dental terminology. And so I covered those in depth in episode 11. Let's look at the association of the dental sciences. So the dental arches, the maxilla is the upper jaw, and that forms the maxillary arch. The mandible is the lower jaw, and that forms the mandibular arch. The two arches together make up the dentition. The dentition, by definition, is the natural teeth in the jawbone. You have three different dentition periods. You have the primary dentition period, which is composed of just the primary teeth. The mixed dentition period, which is composed of the primary dentition and the permanent dentition all in the same mouth at one time. And that's usually happening through that adolescence transition. And then the permanent dentition period happens after that last primary tooth exfoliates out of the mouth. That primary dentition, those are the first 20 teeth, and those begin to erupt between 6 to 8 months of age. And that dentition period is usually done erupting by the age of about 2.5 to 3. And then the permanent dentition, when all of the teeth are in place, is composed of 32 permanent teeth. There are some terms related to dentition periods that I'll share. The word exfoliation. Think of exfoliating your skin. The definition of exfoliating when it comes to the teeth is shedding or loss of the primary teeth. Succedaneous is defined as when a tooth replaces or succeeds another tooth. Every one of the primary teeth are considered replaced by a succedaneous tooth. So the permanent teeth that replace those primary teeth are succedaneous teeth. They replace another tooth. So the teeth that come in behind the primary dentition, all of the molars, those are considered non-succedaneous. They do not have a predecessor. They do not have a tooth that comes in before them. Okay. Diffidont is defined as having two successive sets of teeth, and heterodont is considered having different types of teeth. And we are those people. Anodontia is a term used to describe the complete absence of either an entire dentition or a single tooth or several teeth due to lack of development. When we look at the different types of teeth, in the primary dentition, there are incisors, canines, and molars. There are no premolars, and there's only 2 molars. In the permanent dentition, there are incisors, canines, premolars, and molars. You have all of the different kinds of teeth in the permanent dentition, and the difference between the two dentitions, besides number of teeth, is that there are no premolars in the primary dentition. When we're talking about the arrangement of the teeth, the anterior teeth go from canine to canine on both the maxillary arch and the mandibular arch. The posterior teeth are considered all of the molars and the premolars. When you're talking about the midline divides the mouth from left to right into 2 halves. When we're talking about the occlusal plane is an imaginary horizontal line that goes from front to back. The occlusal plane is the horizontal line in which each tooth makes contact with its opposing tooth. If we were to divide the mouth into the occlusal plane and the midline, you would divide it into 4 separate quadrants. In dentistry, when you are learning about clock positioning or you are doing instrumentation, oftentimes we refer to sextants. Sextants will divide the mouth into 6 different areas. Sextant 1 would be the upper right 3 molars and the premolars. Sextant 2 would be the maxillary anterior teeth. Sextant 3 would be the upper left premolars and molars. Sextant 4 would be the lower left molars and premolars. Sextant 5 would be the mandibular anterior teeth, canine to canine. And sextant 6 would be the lower right premolars and molars. So those are your 6 sextants when you divide the mouth into 6 equal sections. When we're looking at how the teeth are discussed, we use what's called DAQT. D is the dentition, A is the arch, Q is the quadrant, and T is the tooth. So an example of proper DAQT usage would be permanent, mandibular, right, lateral incisor. That is an example of DAQT. Dentition, permanent, arch, mandibular, quadrant, right, tooth, lateral incisor. Let me give you one more example. Primary, maxillary, left, first molar. Dentition, arch, quadrant, tooth. And then we divide the tooth into different surfaces so that we can communicate with each other as providers on what we're talking about when we're referring to a tooth. The mesial surface of the tooth is the surface toward the midline. Remember that midline is vertical line that divides the mouth into left and right sides. The distal surface of the tooth is away from the midline. The lingual surface of the tooth is towards the tongue, and the palatal surface of the tooth is toward the palate. The facial surface of the tooth is towards the lips or cheeks. The occlusal surface of the tooth is the chewing surface of the posterior teeth, and the incisal surface is the biting surface of the anterior teeth. Some of the other terms associated with the arrangement of the teeth: proximal, so that is the surface that's next to the adjacent tooth. Interproximal area is a triangular space between 2 adjacent teeth. A contact area is the area of the tooth that touches an adjacent tooth. Apex is considered the tip of the root. Some of the descriptors, when we say that something is apical, we are saying that it's towards the apex of the tooth. If we say that something is coronal, we are noting that something is toward the crown of the tooth. If we are doing instrumentation and we're moving in an apical direction, we are moving toward the apical portion of the tooth. Another word that you want to know is CEJ, cemento-enamel junction. And that is the spot, the line where the crown meets the root. Another word is cervix that can be called the CEJ. What's really hard about dental terminology is that there's more than one way to describe something. And so sometimes you'll have multiple terms that are tripping you up. One other concept that I just want to cover before I end is anatomical crown, anatomical root, clinical crown, and clinical root. We can all agree that anatomy never changes. The anatomical crown is the portion of the tooth that's covered by enamel. It never changes. It's the anatomy of the tooth structure. It's the portion of the tooth covered by enamel. That's your anatomical crown. Your anatomical root is the portion of the root covered by cementum. This also never changes. It's the anatomy of the tooth structure. The anatomical root is covered with cementum, and it never changes. What gets confusing for you guys as students is when you start talking about clinical crown and clinical root. Can we all agree that the clinical crown is the portion of the tooth that is visible in the mouth? It doesn't matter if it's covered with enamel or cementum. What I want you to picture is a young child with a mixed dentition, an 8-year-old, and their maxillary central incisor is coming in. It's only partially in. The clinical crown is really small, even though the anatomical crown is the portion of the tooth covered by enamel. The anatomical crown doesn't change. But if I asked you about the clinical crown, you would tell me that it's really, really small. You could measure it. You can only see a portion of the anatomical crown on a partially erupted tooth. Clinical crown, by definition, is the portion of the tooth that's visible in the mouth. Now I want you to picture a really elderly person, and they've lost a lot of attachment of their gum tissue. So their gum tissue is pulled away, and now the root surface is exposed. Okay? Their clinical crown is going to be really big. You're going to see all of the anatomical crown and a lot of the anatomical root, and that is still considered the clinical crown. So the anatomical crown is the portion of the tooth covered by enamel. The anatomical root is the portion of the root covered by cementum. But the clinical crown is the portion of the tooth visible in the mouth, and that would include everything you see from the incisal edge all the way down to the gingival margin. That is the clinical crown. So that can change significantly between the 8-year-old who has a partially erupted tooth to the elderly patient who's lost a lot of support around the tooth and they have the root exposed. So that clinical crown does change significantly over time. Now let's talk about the clinical root. The clinical root is the portion of the tooth that is not visible in the mouth. Okay, so now you have the 8-year-old. They have a partially erupted tooth. So that clinical crown is really, really small because the tooth is only partially erupted. The clinical root is everything you can't see. So it's the rest of that crown and all of the root. Now the elderly patient who's lost a lot of the support around the tooth, and so most of it is seen and visible in the mouth, they have a really large clinical crown, but their clinical root is the portion of the tooth that's not visible in the mouth. There's very little clinical root. I hope this helps you guys understand the difference between those and that concept. It's really confusing when you're trying to answer a question that asks you what is bigger, the clinical crown or clinical root on this particular patient. But I think if you take an 8-year-old and an 85-year-old and you try to compare the two and draw it out on paper where that gingival margin would be, knowing that the anatomical crown and the anatomical root never change, but the clinical crown and root does based on the patient and the situation, that will go a long way at helping you. I hope this really helps you guys get some solid foundation of some of the really tough beginning stuff that starts when you're in dental hygiene school and enrolled in the program. Just know that you can do this. You really can. If you get yourself into dental hygiene school, you have what it takes to get through dental hygiene school. I believe in you. Keep working really hard, guys. Bye. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast so that whenever a new episode launches, you will get a notification so that you can take little steps towards learning all that you need to know for dental hygiene school. Take care, everyone.